This is the second video in the Introduction to Simio Animation module, and in this video we'll talk about status plots, pie charts, and labels, and we're going to give examples of these different components that using the same model that we had at the end of that we used in the last video. So if you didn't watch the previous video, it's just a simple source server sync with all of the default values, and then we added an entity instance also. So when we look at labels and plots and so on, these can either be standalone or attached to an object. And I'm going to show this here in just a second. But if you attach it to a dynamic object, it moves along with the object, and then the expression is defined in the context of that object. The first one we're going to look at is a status plot that's not attached to an object. So let's jump back into our model. And I'm going to go up to my animation ribbon, and here we have a status plot here. So I'm just going to place the status plot right here. You can see it just has a default name of plot. We can change this. Let's change this. We're going to plot the number of entities in the system. So let's just say number in system. If I can type it. There we go, number in system. We can also change the text scale, and we can change the timing and so on, but we're going to just leave that as a default for now. And so we look at our status plot, and over here it's asking for expression. You can see that we have expression, a label, and then we have a repeat group. So let's grab this, and we're going to plot two things in our plot. We're going to do let's do the default entity. Oops, see if I can get rid of that. Default entity. There we go. Default entity, population, number in system, number in system. And we're going to label this as NIS. There we go. So remember, we will talk much more about how we build expressions and what this actually means in subsequent videos, but basically what this is saying is take the population of default entity instances and give me the instantaneous number in system. And so when we run, you can see that we have one in our system, and now we have a couple more, and you can see that what is being plotted against time is the actual number in the system. So we can also go back in and add, let's go back in and add a second one. So in addition to the instantaneous number, maybe I want to keep track of the average number. So we'll jump into the repeat group, and we can add as many as we want. So we have our expression. Let's use the expression builder here. Default entity, population, number in system. This time, instead of ending it there, we'll just go and say, let's get the average number in system. And that's our expression. And so now let's just say average, NIS, for our label. Close that out, and now you see that we have two. We have two things in our legend. So if I can zoom in here a little bit, now when we run our model, we're going to see two lines. We're going to see one line that represents the instantaneous number in system. That's the golden colored line, and then we also have the green line, which represents the average number. So if we speed our animation up a little bit, let's make this 5. You can see that as we would expect, the instantaneous number is more variable, and now the average number in system will eventually stabilize out to the actual average the long run average number of entities in the system. So status plots are relatively easy to build, and you can convey a lot of information and how those values change over time. So it's a very useful animation object. The second one we're going to look at is the status pie, but this time we're going to use the status pie plot or pie chart that's attached to the server. So that gives us this information, and we're going to use a shortcut so that we can have the pie chart represent the resource state, so the proportion of time that the resource is spent in any of these default states. So we can jump back over, and this time, rather than selecting from the animation ribbon, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the server and then go up, and now connect it directly to the server, and we have a quick create resource state. And so when we place the status plot right here, all of this information that's required, the data type and the list state, is done for me automatically. And so let me zoom in here. And when we run, if we run now, you can see that the chart is giving us the two states. We haven't defined any failures, so it's either busy or idle. We haven't defined shifts or any of that, so we just have the two busy and idle states that are displayed. And again, note that this is attached to the server, so it's got this, if you look at this property, it's attached to server 1. Whereas when we go back and look at our status plot, it's not attached to anything. It's just in the animation. The last thing that we're going to discuss in this video is the status label, and we'll do two examples. This one in the slide shows an attached status label. We'll also do one that's not attached. So what in this first one, we will attach to server 1 and display the number of entities in the buffer, and we can see that expression right here. So it's attached to server 1, and the expression that we need is input buffer contents. And so let's go in and add that. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit. Let me zoom out just a little bit. Now get back. Okay, so I'm going to get server 1. When I click on it, you can see again we have our attached animation, just like we did when we did the status pie. This time I'm going to do status label and click, and now you can see that this status label is attached to server 1. So now I can put input buffer contents, and as we run the model now, you can see that that's going to have the instantaneous number of entities in the input buffer. Okay, so as I said, this one is attached to server 1. We can do the same thing. Let's go back up and let's just add a status label that's not attached. And so now when I do my second one right here, you can see that it's not attached to anything. It's just looking for an expression. So if we do that same expression, let's do server 1, input buffer contents, and now we have two status labels that show the exact same thing, right? One of them is attached and one's not. And so when you look at that, note the expression for the unattached one is fully qualified with the object, and the attached one is not. So we have just input buffer contents. And so if you're attached, you don't have to qualify the expression, and if you are not attached, then you have to give the fully qualified name. So the final thing that I'll demonstrate here is I will attach a status label to my entity, my default entity. So again, I can highlight, you select it, and then we have the status label. And now this is going to move, since the entity is a dynamic object, the status label will move along with it. So if we click go, you can see I haven't specified anything, but you can see that it is. Let me slow down this animation here. You can see that it's moving along with the entity. So let's go back here and let's just give it like time created. And now when we run, you can see the creation time for the entities. And let's slow this down here. And there you go. There's my 0 for my first entity. That's the one I want. You can see that the status label itself isn't big enough to display all the information since we didn't provide any formatting. So let me just make that a little bit bigger, and we'll be able to now see the time that the entities were created. And so you can go in and do some formatting. In the next video, we'll talk about how to do some string formatting, so don't worry about that for the time being. So again, this is something you should practice with. You should experiment with different status plots and the different opportunities or the different ways that we can create a pie chart and other types of charts. You should do that before watching the next video, as we're going to jump into the topic of symbols in the next video.